Welcome back. You're looking at the end result of stage one of the RC4 drive C2X competition truck. So I had a nice little intro and parts overview recorded, and that got accidentally deleted. So we're starting at the end on this bad boy. So I've pulled a parts overview from the out of boxing video to give you a little refresher of what's going on this truck in this stage. So we'll take a quick look at that. If you've already seen it, skip through it, and then we're going to jump right into the build. So this is your one and only sneak peek of the finished product. So stay tuned and let's see how we got here. All right, just a quick overview here of what I'm going to be installing. It's not a ton, a few little items here from IERC. So I've got some nice little basically floor pan sliders that go along the side, and they're pretty flat. They just tuck up right to the body panel. And also from IERC, some front and rear shock mounts. So these will allow me to lean and lower the stance of the truck a little bit to lower the CG. And then from RC4 drive, I went ahead and picked up the light kit for this model. I picked up the overdrive that they offer, the 36T, 14T overdrive. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the front. And then to replace the screws, the 4 screws that mount the body, these are just M3 by 10 millimeter set screws. So I should be able to just friction fit without having to take a screw on and off. And then of course, had to pick up the metal emblems from CC Hand. And then the last item from RC4 drive would be the aluminum knuckles. This kind of orangey copper color. So that will add a little bit of strength, hopefully, to the knuckles. And that's really it, besides this shining beauty right here. So this is from Scalerfab. And this is going to tuck the bumper right up to the grill. So I got this one with shackle tabs, and I need to pick up a aluminum Fairlead there. But I do have some shackles I'll dig out to mount on this. But that's going to replace the big honking, low-hanging front stinger bumper that it comes with. And of course this is metal instead of plastic. So that should be a great first start. All right. Looks like front end progress. You can see I've got both knuckles and CVDs pulled out. So here's my new knuckle assembly, and it comes with some really nice scale hardware. So I've got the bearings swapped over. There's the stock knuckle, the stock spacer that sits under the steering link top connection above the steering link to take up some of that gap. So this new one comes with that same size spacer. It comes with 2 skinnier spacers. I'm not sure if those are going to be needed. Maybe that's just optional if you have some kind of different steering link that's thicker. I don't see that they'll be needed. So then obviously you won't reuse those. You do use the 2 kingpin screws and the kingpin bushings, and one of those resides on this piece. So knuckles are pretty straightforward, so I get those back on, and then you can see I've also got my differential pulled apart. So I've got my gears out here. So if you look in here, this was a little different for me. There's 4 holes that are retainer screws basically that hold that whole gear assembly secure in there. And those are these 2 little straps. Those ride over the bearings on each side. So once you remove those, you can pull this whole thing out. This is a 3813 stock, and we're going to be putting in a 3614 for the overdrive in the front. So again, 4 screws here. That ought to be a simple swap. So I'm going to get that on, and then we'll button up the front end, and we should have overdrive and knuckles working, and then we'll move on to something else. Quick shot of the stock gear pulled out, and you can see it's got a slot in the back side of the shaft and a little E-clip. So that E-clip rides right here behind the bearing. So you can see I've got the new one already slid in there without the E-clip on it. So what I did to get that E-clip off without making that a big headache was I took You know, these tweezers basically through the hole in the shaft to stabilize it, and then I can take a little tiny flathead driver, and you can basically get it in one of these grooves and just twist it against the shaft, and it flexes this guy right off. So not much struggle really to get that E-clip off once I figured out a good method. Alright, got a little update here. Overdrive's in, diff's on, that's tested and good. It's going to throw the knuckles back on, and I initially said you'd reuse both of these kingpin screws. Well, the one from the bottom you can use, it goes through the kingpin bushing and screws into the plastic knuckle. However, the top goes through the kingpin bushing in the plastic knuckle and needs to thread into aluminum, which is fine threads in here, not these big plastic wide threads for plastic. So I'm not sure why it did not come with 2 extra screws, but I've got some hardware, so I'm going to go dig some out. But that's just something to know. A little odd, but oh well. All right, just time for a quick test here. So that all looks good. Steering looks good, so I think we are done with the front end. So I think maybe the shock towers are the next chassis item. Okay, let's talk front shock hoops here. So I've got the stock removed. You can see how thin the plate is that you actually screw the shock through versus this thickness here. And it does come with a new spacer, but no hardware. So you're basically supposed to reuse existing hardware, but that's not possible because you've added so much plate thickness. So I swapped out to a 16 millimeter. And you can see here that's not coming past the back of the nut. It is getting to the Loctite part of it, but you can see you basically just have the width of the nut between the can, depending on where you mount that shock. Of course, I've got it mounted in that furthest back upper, so there's no issue there. So if I had an 18, that'd be about perfect, but you can see the shock has a little bit of a lean to it, so I think I'm going to add the stock spacer, the plastic one, back in on top of this metal and put in a 20 and see what that does. Since I'm mounting it past the back of the motor, I'm not going to have any clearance issues. One other thing I had to do on this motor side was unclip all the tie wraps, and I had to take both the positive and negative and route them under the motor. So you can see they actually tuck down under the motor there, and then they come back up under that motor mount and sit on top of the bracket. They were all kind of squeezed in here with the servo wire, but there just wasn't enough space in here with this plate tightened up. There would be for the wires, but once you add the insulation and some of these connector bullets into that width, it was too tight there. So little rearranging. I'll have to re-tie wrap some of the stuff to the frame, but it's all working. So I'm going to swap that and then jump over here and get this passenger side, which should be easier. There's no wires or motor. All right, so I've got the stock spacer stacked in there and a 20 millimeter, and look at that, perfect. So that would probably work in any position on that shock tower. So that's nice, and you can see what I'm saying. It got that shock straight to the frame. Of course, it's all kind of leaning already because I've lowered that side, and I've also taken probably half of that preload off. So you can see it already wants to drop that suspension. So we'll get that matched up on this passenger side, but that extra spacer and 20 millimeter screw worked out great right there. So there's the update, moving right along. More progress. So we've got the rears popped on there, and they we're going to require, if I keep that bed on there, which I want to, I think for now, drilling new holes in there. So you can see they have 3 existing holes, that will allow you to move your stock shock hoop over 3 positions. So this is where it comes stock. So this is the farthest forward you could mount the shock. So you can see we're obviously way over here, so there's no holes. You can see there. So I've taken a pencil and I think I'm going to use this one, and I've gone ahead and marked it. So I've got to drill a 16th hole right there. So I'm going to do that on both sides, and that should get us set up here. The shock hoop mounts to the frame, so it's separate from the bed. The actual shock will go through the bed, but these two just thread into the frame, so you can pull this out independently. But really, in this position, you've got to put it in first, because there is a screw for the bed that gets covered. You can see there's one, then I've got one missing, and then there's one more recessed screw hole that's right under the crown, basically. So you've got to put that bed in first before you put these brackets on with these aftermarket ones. But not super hard, just going to require drilling a few holes. I mean, I could go ahead and mark all 6 of them and drill them if I wanted, but I think I'm going to just run it right there for now. I can always come back and add some more holes, but I just really took off this top plate to give me just better access to drill. So I don't know if you have to do that necessarily, but all this comes apart super quick. Okay, I got my side panels drilled for the shock mounts. And I don't know why the IERC website said you needed to drill 1/16 holes, because obviously you don't. These are 1/8. So, correction there, 1/8 holes need to be drilled. So I'm gonna get this stuff back on and see if those holes line up. All right, so the holes lined up that I drilled. So my shock's in there. I've got a stock spacer that it came with. I am gonna need a longer bolt, of course, again, because it just barely sticks through the back. It's not long enough with that thicker plate. But I had a revelation here. As you can see, the shock is touching. And as before, they provided these spacers with the rears, and there was one shot on their website that caught the bottom, and it looked like they're using them to space the bottom out, and they're using the stock at the top, and that looked to be the same at the front, whereas I doubled these up. So I may take that silver one off, put it at the bottom, and just use the stock at the top and see if that can still keep the shock off of that plate. So I've got clearance right now. So it looked like that was the way they intended it, but there's no instructions, of course, so had to just have a keen eye and go back and look at their website. But it looks like these rears are going to go on no problem now, and then I'll probably go back and flip-flop these front spacers and see if that'll still work. So moving right along. Well, I got the back on. That's a success. I did have to Dremel out a little more for the nut clearance on the back up here. I'll show a picture of that. And got these lower spacers on the front shock. You can see that metal spacer down there. And this is the stock spacer. And you can see it's still really close. We're clearing it on both sides, but I would much rather have just a little more clearance. And you can see I went back to the stock length screws that don't come out at all. But I think I'm going to swap back. I pulled out these spacers. These are the stock spacers for the knuckles that we didn't reuse because we had new ones. And then these are those 2 thin spacers that came with the aluminum knuckles that I did not know what they were for. And I looked at this front end again, and I thought maybe they slipped under the bottom there, but there's just not enough space. So I thought maybe those go there, but I tried and I tried, and if you get them in there, you can't seat this aluminum plate fully. So I think that little bit of slop up and down is just something you live with. You could put a washer in there, that would probably be thin enough to take it up. But since I'm not using these little thin guys or those, I think one of those is going to come up here and space the top of these shocks out just a little more and I think I'll be happy with the clearance to that plate and to this screw and the spring. So you know, as you go, you learn little things. It's nice to go slow. You can kind of inspect stuff and take another look at it. So with new parts, it's always a little bit of a discovery process here. All right, well, spacers are on. Happy with that. Got plenty of space now to those shock towers. So as I'm compressing and testing, you can see here the shock can get all the way down and bottom out. So then I was looking at this one and it won't. And you can see the problem. The frame is hitting the panhard. But since RC4 drive includes this upgraded panhard bracket / axle truss, it actually has a lower hole, you can see right there. So I think that will actually help me out. If you look at the angles, that's going to lower that panhard angle. Now that I've pushed the suspension up, my drag link and my panhard are off. So I think that will help get those parallel again. And it will definitely help the compression clearance. So that's what's left. So lowering that down hopefully will get me all the way bottoming out with the shock, give me equal travel on both sides. So, you know, another little thing, as you go, you discover things. All right, well, dropping the panhard worked and it didn't work. So, you know, in that lower hole, it works. It gives me full compression over here. But the problem I was having, and I guess you can see it maybe from the top, is if this panhard is tightened down, it comes across the top of that diff. So if you want to come down on this side, you're hitting that. So if I'm tightened down in this lower position and I compress over here, I've just created the same problem that I had on the other side. So I can't get full compression. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll space this guy out, put in a spacer there, a long bolt, and just avoid the top of this diff. Well, that works great, except on full compression straight down the middle. So let me pull this back and compress it, and you can see that third link up top there. So that actually gets into the spur. So basically, without having that third member link kind of bent in a funky shape instead of straight to go around that spur, there's no reason to even try to clearance this out. So basically, it can't compress as low as I want it to, and at this top setup right here, without some modification to that link to miss this, and some attention to where this is in relation to the diff and the frame here. So basically, I think I'm going to go back and lower this down to these this lower set of holes here. Still keep it in the back position, keep it leaned. That'll help drop it some, but maybe that will work out all these clearances and enable this to get to full compression on each side and straight down the middle as well. So another little thing learned here. Well, I just had an idea of maybe putting a spacer at that link mount to push it over and get it further away. And in theory that would solve this problem, but then again, like doing a full compression right down the middle, it's right at the bottom of the servo. So I don't think I could get that much travel before I hit that servo anyways. So, you know, I don't think I'm going to go down that road to put a link there and try to make this work, because I think I'm going to bottom out on that servo edge there. I mean, it's just getting so low now. So like I said before, I'm just going to raise those shocks up one more hole. Okay, we got the suspension all buttoned up, put back together. So we've got full compression, no binding, and then we're maxed out here at the side. So the tire gets right up here to the edge, so that's just perfect. And I can definitely see it sitting quite a bit lower, and we'll take a look at it with the body on here in a minute when we get to it. But I think the next thing we're going to do is get on these IERC sliders. So these guys are going to come in here, basically be a full pan and sit something like that and kind of come up and catch the body edge. So those should be pretty quick to get on. Look at that. Got it sitting quite a bit lower. Got the sliders on, and they've got little notches that allow for the mount points. So very clean. They also went on 2 screws on each side that hold the transfer case mount to the frame. And on the driver's side, I did have to move my on-off switch. You can see it's just dangling. It was double-sided underneath this platform stock, but it can't fit in this gap, so I will relocate that. But so far so good, except for one little thing. I mentioned earlier that the suspension was good, no binding, and that was true, but I hadn't turned it full lock. So you can see here, typically you can turn and get over all the way to your link. So I've still got quite a bit to go, but I'm hitting the shock because of the thicker mount and the spacing at the top and the fact that it's leaned back. Puts it in that path of travel, the back of the wheel. So there's a couple of options to deal with that. Could be different wheels, different offset. I've got a lot of thread exposed here, so I could look at some extended hexes potentially, maybe 3 millimeter longer or something. These are the 6-lug wagon wheels from RC4WD. I know for the 5-lug they have multiple offset hubs, but I don't think they make those for the 6. So I will investigate that a little further, but just so you know, there is some rub at full lock on those shocks when they're leaned back. So something to know, but I think that can be dealt with in a couple of different ways. So maybe next we'll look at the bumper and be done with the chassis. Well, after a lot of struggle, this bumper is on. For some reason, it was not wide enough. So I had to take these tabs on each side that have the slot and bend those back by hand multiple times with this guy, which is flat. You can just clamp it so it didn't scratch the finish, but just had to bend those out and flare them out, and my God, work them on there. And then once I cinched the screws down, it kind of bent them back fairly straight, but it was a struggle, and I'm hoping I can get it back off because I just remembered I didn't put the Fairlead on, so I'm going to need to get behind it, I believe, for some nuts to back that up. So let me toss the body on and I'll give you a quick preview of it. And there we are. What an improvement. That thing is tucked up nice and tight. It sits below the grill instead of midway up the grill. So just a massive improvement over this big honking stock plastic guy. I mean, I just can't get over how nice and tight that is. Great approach angle. If I had not opted for shackles, even better, but gotta have some shackles for the scale. So I think, speaking of shackles, I'm gonna dig those out and see if I can get the Fairlead on there as well. Good news, I was able to get the front bumper back off, but you can see there a little evidence of the tight fit on the frame there, a little scuffing. So I've got it off here, and I've got this worn Fairlead from RC4WD that comes with some nice stickers, and it's got the nuts and screws, and I went ahead and popped it in to test fit it. So it works, yay. We'll have to get creative and find a good way to get those nuts started back there and back those up. And I pulled out the shackles I had on hand, which are just kind of some cheapos that I added onto an order, and they look fairly wide. We'll get them on there and see, but I may have to find some other ones. These tabs are pretty narrow. Maybe I can get creative and find a little spacer or something, but that's what I got for now. So we get this bolted back together shortly. All right, here's a quick shot of a hot racing shackle on the right versus these Endura on the left. So you can see what I'm talking about. They're much wider. These hot racing are really nice. I pulled this off another rig, but they fit really well on tabs. Just a little bit of play is just what you want. So here's the Endura, and you can see there, and I've worked this with some pliers to squeeze it. But like I say, these are a couple of bucks for 4, and hot racing is 15 bucks for 2. So you can see why I ordered some Endura to try, but they don't look bad. I think they'll work for now. And there we are with it back installed. Nice little pop of color with those shackles. So I think we'll call the chassis complete, and I think it's time to jump forward to the body details. So I think the first thing we've got is a little bit of lighting to get to. We got a little update here, and it's not lighting, obviously. I decided I probably ought to do this interior detail before I get the lights all routed in there. So these little metal pieces fit in these little door grooves here. So I kind of went round and around about what glue to use that wouldn't make a mess. So I use this clear window cement. So you can get a little on the tip of that nozzle, and it's fairly thick, so you can kind of just take a strip in your hand and run it across the back side and get a little glue on there, and then you kind of slip it from the front to the back under that armrest and that little slot. And then I kind of came back with an X-Acto at the very front and slipped it under there with a little glue, since that's the piece I was holding. But I think this came out pretty clean and did not make a mess. I thought CA glue would be way too thin and runny, and it's quick drying, and if you touch it, fingerprints. So I think this worked out pretty good. So I'm gonna get this other side done here and get that back in. And then on the shock, you can see I ended up going vertical. I played with every leaned position on that bottom row, and every one of those at some point in compression turning, my tire was getting into the shock coil. So I don't see another solution besides running it straight up for now. Look like if I kick my wheels out any wider, I'm going to get into my fenders. So I think I'm going to leave it like this for now and run it and see. So anyways, there's the update for now. Moving forward to the lights. I'm about to embark on the lights, and I thought this was going to be an easy plug and play since these are designed for the C2X. You can see here in this little bumper, there's 2 little LED holes, and there's a nice, there's 2 little chaseways underneath this bed to route those wires. So obviously that's part of the chassis, and they only give you 1 whip. So they give you headlights, 5mm, and then 2 sets of 3mm ambers. Because you'll have 1 here, and then you've got the side marker indicator. So you've got 4 ambers, 2 headlights, and then you've got 2 taillights. But as you can see, they're wired to the body whip. So when you take the body off, you would still be connected to these 2, so you couldn't really take the body very far. So that's kind of a fail. So I'm gonna have to chop off those taillights and wire those in so they have a separate plug and can stay attached to the chassis side, and then the rest of the whip will remain unchanged and just go to these front headlights and be the body side of that. So something to know, kind of odd that they didn't get this right, knowing that this truck is just a cab. But anyways, let me get these modified and I'll get them in. We got the lighting installed on the body side. So you can see I kind of use that bumper bracket as a hold down. So I routed everything kind of back behind each post and under. And that way I just had to use one little tie down point, which was a leftover, kind of one of these stick-on guys from My Trick RC. These are super handy. Just give you a place to zip tie. So that's what that is, and then kind of just comes down the side of the interior tray loose to give you a little slack, but you can kind of tuck it back when you're putting it on the body, and then the receiver is basically under right here when this is flipped over. So they're tested, they look good. You do have to pull the grill and everything off to get them installed, but pretty easy process overall. So now I'm going to wire up that tail light harness and get the chassis side finished up. But body lighting is there. So I was looking at these rear tail lights, and these are those channels I was telling you about. So you can see here the bumper just has two little holes. And these channels actually have a little stop for the LED bulb, you can see there. But not wanting to see the wire, I found some nice thin shrink tube that I think is going to be perfect. So that's going to ride in there, and I don't even know that I'll have to shrink it. It fits in there just fine. So there's not really any hold down, so I may just use a couple dabs of shoe goo and then pop the shrink tube in there. But I think that's going to work pretty clean to hide that wiring. But I'm going to have to cut these and slide that on, I guess, prior to bringing together the Y connection. Alright, got the rear lights in, wired up, and you can see how I routed them here. They work out nicely coming out there from those channels. They kind of slip right here in this little half circle. They come out on each side of that. So right under there, so you kind of have to let them come forward. So I kind of twisted that wire to keep some tension on it up, and then zip tied it to the post under here and then up. And I ended up putting in a little cyclical switch. I noticed that the stock receiver has got a 3-position switch for channel 3. So figured I'd take advantage of that. So for now I've got the tail lights on one and the rest of the lights for the body on the other. So let's so the first one kicks on the tail lights, and the second one turns those off, kicks on the main lights, and then the third switch will kick back on the tail lights, so everything is on. So in the future I could run the tail lights and the headlights on a Y harness, and then if I had a light bar or some other lights, have that switchable separately. But for now I'll just take advantage of both of those switches. So you can see I just double-sided that to the receiver and the plate, so that's all in there nicely. So last thing here is to get some detail on this body. Here we are at the end. So I don't think I showed some of this earlier since I deleted my intro. So these are the RC4 drive clean stripes for the 2-door or 4-door Mojave body. So I'm going to pull from that, and then I think I did show this, just the metal emblems for the bruiser / TF2, and then the grub screws for the body mount. And then I've got the stock decal sheet to pull from, as well as some other scale stickers. And then of course get the mirrors on there. But I think when we come back, this thing will look a little different, and I'll get it mounted up and we'll see the finished product here. Here we go with a little vinyl progress. So I got these on, and the way I do these, I kind of tape them in place, and then I tape a piece across it so I can pull it back and cut the backer and lay down one half, and then pull this back, pull the backer off, and lay down the second half. And that allows you to get pretty good placement. So I did this passenger side, or I guess driver side first. And then to match that, you know, I had this little piece here, and then I had this little tip coming right near the hood. And of course you've got the fender line. So when I did the opposite side, I cut that vinyl closer, and I'll show a picture of that, but I cut it a little closer in those key points so I could see behind the backer exactly kind of where these were. And of course you cut that really close to the vinyl so you can get it on the curve. But those went on nice and smooth. Of course I got the banding here, that's just one. That was easy to just kind of hold by the two ends and get aligned. And then what's nice is these door grooves are basically flush with that vinyl groove. So you don't have to cut it, it basically lays flat anyways. The door groove, of course, I did cut these with an X-Acto, and then I laid it down with this little piece in the groove. But not hard at all. And then bam, we got the Toyota on the back. So I think this is probably the extent of those finals. So I think now it's just a few added stickers to get on there. One thing about the hood, I kind of went back and forth. They cut the hood sticker wrong. They cut it right at the edge and they clipped off this edge. So I ended up cutting this stripe thinner to even it back out. And I kind of like that. So I've got a thin and a wide stripe. But then as it crosses the hood, their sticker is just incorrect. You can see this stripe is not wide enough. So if you align the outer edge, you don't align the middle stripe, the blank. If you align the blank, then your outer edge steps. And I played with that so many different ways, and I finally settled on that, and you can't really tell. It made sense to align that outer edge, and then that kind of inner stripe is kind of an optical illusion. You kind of have to look at it right on to know that it kind of steps over, but just a quirk there that's kind of weird. So I think the next thing will be finishing out the decals, and then I'll see how I'm going to attach those metal emblems, probably for the last thing. All right, some metal emblems installed. So these guys kind of went round and round on a good method to do it, and you can see these are really thin and very delicate and tiny. So I ended up finding some super thin 3M double side that's like paper thin. So I just cut a strip and laid it down on there, and then took an X-Acto and traced it, you know, cut it out. So then you're just left with your emblem to mount, and all the reference images I found, it seemed to kind of line up with the keyhole. So that's kind of what I was shooting for. This doesn't have the raised area on the fender like some of the TF2s that you would know exactly where to put this. But I think it looks pretty good there, so let's take a look at it here with the masking removed. And it was helpful too to have the stripes. So those were another easy way to help me get this aligned. But the tape was more about just spacing in general. So now I'm going to measure this up, and then I'll match it on the other side. And then I've got this Toyota badge for the grill, and because of the grill, the way it's slotted, I may end up using some shoe goo. You can see it's just got those grill slots, very thin, so not a lot of contact surface there. So anyways, we'll see when I get to that, but so far, super clean. That came out great. All right, here we are, the end of stage one, and I gotta say, this thing came out stellar. So I got that final grill badge shoe gooed on there. That came out really nice. Got a few more little detail stickers on the Fairlead And I really didn't use too many that came with the C2X, besides like the keyhole, and I popped the 22R on there, and then the RC four-wheel drive logo on the back. But it just looks so clean just with the vinyl. I didn't want to go nuts with like sponsor stickers or anything just yet. But the other little surprise there is the fire stick on the back. That's a little custom made antenna from a seller that I just had several back stocks of, so I threw that on there. No trail rig is complete without a CB. And I guess the final thing, I got those grub screws in there for the mounting points, so no more screws to undo on the trail, just flex the body and it friction fits over those posts now. So that's super clean. Definitely sitting lower, which is good. So that with the overdrive ought to be a nice combo. The back shock towers worked out just great with the lean. I don't know if I'd recommend these front IERC shock towers, just because I wasn't able to take advantage of all of these positions. I basically had to go back to a vertical shock position to keep the clearance at full lock to that coil. You can see if that shock's leaned back, you're just in the tire, as well as that lower link. The back edge of the tire gets right to that. So wanted to keep the full radius. So I may look at the RC four-wheel drive Galande front hoops. They're just vertical but taller, so that would allow the front to drop a little more. But as you remember, there were some issues with clearance, panhard and diff, and then that third link and the spur. So you can only go so low before you end up with some problems. So I think I'm going to run it for now as is, and then we'll just go from there, see if it needs any more modification. But looks great. I love the full side pan sliders. That'll be good protection underneath, protect the edge of that hard body. So I think that's going to do it. I'll leave you with a few photos and stuff with the lights on, and a few comparison shots to the stock version. But as always, thanks for coming along. Maybe you learned something if you're looking at this truck or you've got this truck. And definitely stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.